Whenever someone mentions Niger in Europe, the leaders with a colonial mindset feel their greedy eyes spinning. It's because Niger became the first country to come out of the trap. For centuries, European colonizers exploited African countries, and for decades, after independence, they looted their resources. The same was true for Niger, as France used to quench its thirst for uranium from Niger. However, in July this year, Niger's military junta took control of their hands and cut ties with France. This meant all the resources being flooded in France for pennies instantly stopped, bringing France to a near breaking point. Not only that, but Niger inspired other African countries. That's why we saw a series of coups. However, to retain power and show what would happen to an African country trying to get real independence, Europe and the US have initiated a series of brutal sanctions. This was not new until they used their lapdog, ECOWAS, an African body, to also put sanctions on Niger. How are they trying to punish, and where will this silent war take the betraying African countries? Let's know about that in this video. Previously, European Union countries had initiated preparations to impose the initial sanctions on members of the junta that had taken control in Niger the month before. The new military leaders had, up to that point, overlooked international diplomatic attempts at mediation. Neighboring countries that supported the armed takeover had appealed to the United Nations to intervene and prevent a military attack that was being threatened by other West African nations. An EU official engaged in sanctions work, and an EU diplomat had indicated that the bloc had begun discussions regarding the criteria for punitive actions. The official had specified that this would include the undermining of democracy in Niger and was likely to be agreed upon shortly. You see, they are using the universal excuse of undermining democracy, an excuse they have used for nearly all wars and sanctions. Now, it has become old-fashioned, yet people in the West still buy it. The EU diplomat had said that the next step would involve imposing sanctions on individual members of the junta deemed accountable. According to the official and another EU diplomat, national officials had discussed the issue completely. The imposition of sanctions had required consensus among all 27 EU member states, and it had not been immediately apparent when this would occur. Following the expiration of the deadline for the reinstatement of Niger's ousted President Mohamed Bazoum, leaders of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, were scheduled to convene. Peter Stano, the EU executive spokesperson on foreign policy, said that the EU is prepared to endorse ECOWAS's decisions, including the implementation of sanctions. In other words, he said that the EU is behind the ECOWAS to betray an African country and give proof that the ECOWAS is really a lapdog. Last month, the EU announced the suspension of security cooperation and financial support, initially set at €503 million from 2021 to 2024, designated for enhancing governance and education. Later, European Union countries adopted a framework to levy sanctions on members of the junta that had taken control in Niger in July. The new framework would have enabled the EU to sanction individuals and entities responsible for actions that had endangered Europe's interests in Niger. In other words, the plan was to put sanctions to weaken the very elements that had vowed to make Niger free of any external pressure. Through this, the EU had aimed to mirror and strengthen any measures taken by the West African regional body ECOWAS. EU foreign policy chief said that the EU had strongly condemned the coup d'etat in Niger from the very beginning, and with the latest framework, the EU reinforces its support to ECOWAS efforts and sends a clear message that military coups come with consequences. Well, the EU is trying to show that it's actually ECOWAS's plan to intervene in Niger and reverse the coup, not the EU's or French's. That's how they play wisely, and the ECOWAS is made a fool of. According to the latest sanctions, the EU can freeze the assets of targeted entities and individuals and impose travel bans on them. It's because Niger has announced to sell uranium at market prices to France, not less than that. The country ranks as the world's 7th largest producer of uranium, a radioactive metal widely utilized in nuclear energy and cancer treatment. At the same time, it remains one of the most impoverished nations globally, receiving almost $2 billion in development aid annually. As indicated by the 2023 budget projections, More than $2.2 billion, around 40% of Niger's total budget of $553 billion for the fiscal year, was expected to come from external partners. Now, the Niger military junta wants to change this. Earlier leaders kept Niger's economy dependent on foreign aid, thus getting into a trap. Moving away meant cutting off this aid. Now the military junta has taken this bold measure no matter what the cost. That's a sacrifice to ensure that from now on, Niger's economy does not have even a fraction of aid. As a result, the West has decided to punish. Using its lapdogs in the past, like the Economic Community of West African States and the West African Monetary and Economic Union, some of the most stringent sanctions were put on Niger. ECOWAS suspended all commercial activities with Niger, froze its state assets in the regional central bank, froze the assets of the state and state enterprises in commercial banks, and stopped all financial aid from regional development banks. Now, it's being feared that the financial sanctions might potentially lead to Niger defaulting on its debt repayments. Also, a planned $51 million bond issuance by Niger in the West African regional debt market was canceled by the regional central bank following the imposition of sanctions. Niger had aimed to raise $834 million from the regional debt market in 2023. The ECOWAS sanctions resulted in Nigeria cutting off the power supply to the country via the 80-megawatt Burn-and-Kebbi line, while Ivory Coast suspended the import and export of Nigerian goods. Furthermore, West Africa's regional central bank, the BCEAO, shut down its branches in Niger, citing operational risks. What's more, earlier, the European Union suspended its financial aid and security cooperation with Niger. France, another significant partner of its former colony, immediately ceased its development aid and budgetary support, demanding a prompt return to constitutional order. French development aid for Niger was approximately $130 million in 2022 and was expected to be slightly higher this year. The Dutch government, which had been supporting development and security programs in Niger, temporarily suspended its direct cooperation with the government following the coup. The United States, a significant provider of humanitarian and security aid, suspended assistance programs to Niger, valued at over $100 million due to the military takeover, urging the junta to reinstate the elected government. The U.S. had previously warned that the coup could lead to the suspension of all cooperation. Canada suspended direct development assistance and expressed support for ECOWAS mediation efforts for Niger to restore constitutional order. Also, the World Bank suspended disbursements until further notice, except for private sector partnerships, which it stated would continue cautiously. Niger has one of the largest World Bank portfolios in Africa, amounting to $4.5 billion. Additionally, it received $600 million in direct budget support from the bank between 2022 and 2023. Previously, the EU had been mulling over sanctions on Niger, whereas the US aimed to maintain open lines of communication with the military junta. The European Union had been discussing potential sanctions against the military regime in Niger. According to the European Union, the sanctions were designed to target individuals and organizations obstructing the restoration of Niger's constitutional order. However, the United States had adopted a more careful stance, expressing its intention to sustain communication with the Nigerian coup leaders. It had taken the United States over 2 months to acknowledge the coup and announce the suspension of the majority of its development aid to Niger. It turned out that U.S. policy on Niger seemed to correspond with that of Iran, where President Ibrahim Raisi had expressed Tehran's readiness to collaborate with the military regime in Niamey during a meeting with Nigerian Foreign Minister Bakari Ya'u Sangare on Wednesday. A statement on the website of the Iranian presidency quoted Raisi as describing the resistance of the Nigerian people against European hegemonic policies as evidence of Africa's rejection of colonialism. At present, the United States has officially labeled the July military takeover in Niger as a coup, a decision that curtails U.S. military aid and collaboration with a country that the Pentagon considers a crucial partner in the fight against terrorism in the region. The U.S. official mentioned that the U.S. had urged the military leaders who forcibly removed the president from power to reinstate a civilian and democratic government within the 120-day period outlined by Niger's constitution. However, the military officials did not adhere to these constitutional guidelines. It was reported by the US that the Niger junta informed it that they have chosen to nullify that constitution and were currently in the process of drafting a new one with an uncertain timeline. It was said that the US Embassy can continue its operations, and the US military has decided to maintain its presence in Niger, according to administration officials. Nevertheless, the US is not participating in any joint missions or training with Nigerian forces, a position that has been upheld since the coup occurred in late July. Intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance operations through US drones are ongoing, with the official noting that these operations are concentrated on monitoring threats to our forces, including threats from violent extremist organizations. Violent extremist organizations can thrive in areas of instability, and coups like the one in Niger only provide more opportunities, the official added. Well, it becomes suspicious that the US would want to stay in a country that it thinks is under a coup. Everyone knows that the US is never so generous as to think so kindly about any country unless it has self-interests. But now, it becomes obvious that the Niger military won't allow US troops and military bases in Niger to continue. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. However, the brunt of sanctions is hitting Niger's population. At present, a significant number of people in Niger are experiencing the consequences of sanctions. However, those backing the junta see it as a necessary sacrifice. These sanctions squeezed incomes in one of the world's most impoverished countries, leaving millions to struggle without assistance. Not only is food extremely costly, but school supplies have also doubled in price. People have to provide clothing for their children, and most importantly, manage their illnesses, which is becoming difficult. Following the overthrow of Niger's President Mohamed Bazoum by elite soldiers on July 26, the country faced economic sanctions from West Africa's regional bloc, ECOWAS, as well as from Western and European countries, including the United States, which had previously provided aid for health, security, and infrastructure needs. Neighboring countries closed their borders with Niger, and over 70% of its electricity, supplied by Nigeria, was cut off due to the suspension of financial transactions with West African nations. Niger's assets in foreign banks were frozen, and hundreds of millions of dollars in aid were withheld. While these sanctions were the harshest ever imposed by the regional bloc, in an attempt to curb the frequency of coups in Africa's volatile Sahel region, they have had minimal or no impact on the junta's ambitions. According to UN estimates, Niger, the world's third least developed nation, received $1,077 billion in assistance in 2021, with more than half allocated for humanitarian aid as well as social infrastructure and services. All of this aid is now at risk. But the people of Niger are supporting the junta, who feel that the democratic government has not met their expectations. Even as they feel the pinch of sanctions, many people on the streets of the capital, Niamey, expressed their support for the coup. They dismiss concerns from the West, which viewed Niger as its last strategic partner in the fight against terrorism in the Sahel. What would the West say about this now, as the very people are supporting the junta? If democracy was under threat, then now, the people have shown that they actually want the military to save them from being looted by the West, under the disguise of saving democracy, using democratic puppets. The love of the homeland has made us forget the difficult times that the entire country is going through, said Abdou Ali, one supporter in the capital. No one cares about the reason, the price of goods. However, the ones who are not in the condition to sacrifice are feeling the pain. Dr. Soumana Souna Sofiane, Secretary General of the Pharmacists Union in Niger, said that they are trying to respond to a catastrophic situation for the country. Many drugstores across Niger are running low on essential supplies at a time when the country is facing public health emergencies such as cholera. In their desperation for a solution, pharmacies have resorted to providing patients with alternative medications to those they require. This has never been seen in the world, where the West is banning medicine supply to Niger, putting the lives of millions at risk. The Niger's PM was angry and said that this was not even done during the wars. Meanwhile, food supplies are also dwindling. Rising inflation and soaring food prices are significantly impacting communities' ability to make ends meet, according to the UN World Food Programme's country office. The agency indicated that 3.3 million people in Niger were facing acute food insecurity even before the coup. Niger, West Africa's second-largest country in terms of landmass but landlocked, heavily relies on trade with neighbors, which has now come to a halt. Food and drug supplies were among the top imported products last year. At the border with Benin, trucks loaded with goods and relief items are lined up for several kilometers, waiting to enter Niger, although some are in transit to other countries. More than 9,000 metric tons of cargo, including specialized foods for the treatment and prevention of malnutrition, destined for Niger and neighboring Burkina Faso, remain blocked between Benin and Togo, according to the UN Food Agency, due to sanctions. The UN's resident coordinator is concerned that the goal of reaching at least 80% of the 4.4 million targeted people with humanitarian aid in Niger this year might be in jeopardy. For many families, the sanctions have hit them at their core. According to the World Bank, nearly 1 in 5 Nigerians are believed to be livestock breeders. They were able to export live animals worth $10 million to Nigeria in 2021, but are now desperate to find an alternative market. Across Niger, prices of essential items are soaring. A 25-kilogram bag of rice, the main staple food, has increased in price by more than 50% since the imposition of the sanctions. People are reporting that their stocks are depleting overnight, as nothing crosses borders to supply them. Other businesses have shut down after incurring additional costs to run generators following the power cut from Nigeria. Residents living near the border towns between Nigeria and Niger were alarmed when ECOWAS placed sanctions on the country. These measures included shutting down borders, cutting off the electricity supply, and the possibility of military intervention. There is apprehension that a possible ECOWAS military intervention could worsen existing problems and potentially give rise to new ones. The United Nations has cautioned that the ongoing crisis in Niger could significantly exacerbate food insecurity in the already impoverished country. They have appealed for humanitarian exemptions to the sanctions and border closures to prevent a disaster. The significant rise in the cost of essential food items has burdened residents, making it increasingly difficult for them to afford basic necessities. The combination of increased insecurity and soaring food prices has created a dire situation for the border community. What troubles the people most is hunger and insecurity. They are stuck, sick, and tired of the situation they are in. The financial consequences of the sanctions and the imminent intervention have also caused setbacks for businesses, leaving traders struggling to cope. The Nigerian businessman stated that the effects of the sanctions and the border closure have been significant. Economic activities have slowed down. Usually, the closer your business is to the border, the better. But the current situation in Niger has changed everything. Businesses are almost down because most of their customers are from Niger. The escalating tension has particularly impacted young people in these border communities. The frustrations of these young people indicate that the decisions by the Nigerian president and the chairman of ECOWAS, Bola Tinubu, are likely to have significant humanitarian implications for their own citizens as well. The potential decision by the regional bloc to take military action has turned Nigerians against Nigerians. Even if they cross into Niger, when Nigerians realize they are from Nigeria, they view them as their enemy, unlike before. The brother relationship has deteriorated, simply because the West is using the puppet ECOWAS. The coup in Niger has prompted West African leaders to take more decisive actions. However, it is increasingly evident that the consequences of any potential military action to reinstate constitutional order may have far-reaching implications beyond the borders of Niger. Not only that, but breaking international law and using military intervention to save democracy also seems questionable, something the West has to think about. Otherwise, it will make itself a laughingstock. Now, the appropriateness of the sanctions imposed on Niger, one of the world's poorest nations, is a matter of debate. The punitive economic actions taken in response to the coup are likely to make the population even more vulnerable, without ensuring a successful reinstatement of constitutional order. The West knows Niger's military junta is determined, therefore they are trying to break the people of Niger, putting sanctions that directly impact the public. In that way, they expect that the public will turn against the junta, demanding a reversal of the coup. That's the worst and most unethical strategy the West can ever think of. Responding to the sanctions put by the West and the ECOWAS, Niger's PM Ali Lamine Zain has labeled them as cruel and unfair. He called it injustice, questioning the African countries in ECOWAS of their ill intentions. He said that this kind of treatment was never given to any other country in the world. He continued and said that the sanctions have banned imports of medicine, food, and electricity, the necessities the public needs. By banning them, the ECOWAS countries are giving evidence that they don't respect human life. He said that these types of sanctions are not put even during wars. He said that Ukraine was never sanctioned to not have food, medicine, and electricity. Then why is this being done with Niger? However, he said that Niger will come out of this crisis. It's a time of sacrifice, but the country will grow as it's one of the richest in the world due to its natural resources. Furthermore, he asked the people of Nigeria to stand with the people of Niger, as the Nigerian president has planned to be a forever puppet of the West. What do you think? Could the sanctions be effective if ECOWAS and African countries had not joined the West? Isn't it true that the West cannot punish any African country unless someone from inside betrays it? Let us know your thoughts on what should be done with the African leaders supporting the West and betraying their brother countries. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.